Who's in, who's out, and what counts? Written by Taylor Reed. Tonight, folks in northern Michigan will sit in dimly lit rooms, uncomfortable because they are cold. Some people, communities even, grieve as they face pressing questions about their present and future. Services people depend upon are disrupted. Systems we all rely upon have been shuttered by ice buildup, combined with brutal winds, frigid temperatures, and all-around undesirable conditions. National news on the situation might have gone quiet. Still, damage persists, and the effects cut deep grooves. You might feel it. You might feel pulled to respond. But how? It might have been a decade ago, but I still remember being glad I wore a sweater. The small and dimly lit room was a bit chilly, despite the subtle warmth of the beeswax taper candles and the hanging haze of incense. I couldn't say I was comfortable, one, after having stood still for so long, and two, because I sat cross-legged on the floor, packed in amongst the ranks of folks I, in some ways, did not belong. The small room was someone's living quarters, tucked away in the corner of a large building that sat on the campus of a Methodist university. Those who were meeting there weren't Methodists. An Eastern Orthodox priest from a nearby town would visit this space periodically, welcome to offer quiet services with meditative liturgy, chants, and prayer, the smells and bells, and work through questions for students at the school who, for one reason or another, were actively in the process of becoming Orthodox, or who had already been chrismated. In other words, those who truly belonged. It was a subtle undercurrent, a hidden stream, often undetected there on campus. Amongst the prevailing evangelicism, the assumption was that everyone tended to operate more or less from the same trappings and cultural upbringing. You didn't really have to probe much. Those drawn to the Orthodox circles were generally swimming in deeper questions of the present and future. Most everything at the evening service was symbolic and foreign. Similar to when I attended my first used equipment auction, I had never been so aware of the subtle movements of my own arms and fingers. If I lapsed in my care, usually subconscious gestures might physically indicate commitment to something far beyond what I could handle committing to. Much of what was read, spoken, and referenced was in Greek, sometimes Russian too. I was there for a few reasons. I wasn't Orthodox, and while I could easily claim the Methodist label, that didn't sit well with me either. I had Orthodox friends there that evening, and I knew many of those there to be thoughtful and honest people. I myself was trying to be thoughtful and honest. During the more dialogue-oriented portion of the evening, the back and forth for learning more, I spoke up and asked a question. That question might come up in another essay. Right now, I have someone else's inquiry to the priest in mind, a loaded question for an Orthodox father on Protestant grounds. Who counts as Christian? Who is qualified to be a follower of Christ? The priest answered concisely, "You know, that's a question I don't pay any attention to. I'm having a hard enough time trying to understand and work out how I can be a follower of Christ each day." Making judgment calls on that front wasn't his business. His task, what called for his focus and work, was his own daily and active becoming. Setting boundaries on the who, how, and where that process was being worked out elsewhere wasn't for him. His role was only to be sensitive and accountable to what that process looked like in his own life, which of course rippled outward. The more he did it, the less things were about him. I heard echoes of that sentiment earlier this month as I listened in on a discussion entitled Acceptance and Agency at the End of Modernity. Someone leveled a quandary at those speaking. What's worth doing in the face of myriad forms of instability and crumbling, disruption and confusion? Is the answer found in political projects, grassroots work, deeply engaging cultural forces, or attempting to step back from them? Their response? It wasn't their role to prescribe to others what an appropriate response looked like. They could offer examples to draw from, but there's no single answer. The breadth of what's taking place and the scale of what's called for is so vast that appropriate lived-out answers might even appear to be at odds at first glance. For some, throwing their weight behind supporting government institutions and systems and working to keep them operating might make the most sense. For others, the work of dismantling might be called for. Some might be drawn to what's visibly lauded. Others are better off not being noticed, doing needed yet quiet work that's hidden, perhaps even by necessity. It could be stepping into a role they're uncomfortable in. It could be stepping back from such roles and doing the dishes or getting better sleep. What matters is paying attention, letting your heart be shaped, and responding accordingly with respect to the unique combination of resources, skills, circumstances, and experience you alone carry. Although that's work you alone can do, it isn't always a solitary effort. Maybe it's informed by gathering with a group of people committed to traditions that have been found reliable for generations. The strength you think you carry, or lack thereof, might be totally upended by an encounter with forces of the more than human world. For me, I'm writing right now, although sometimes I question how much that counts. Still, I'm thankful for the writing, organizing, and compiling that others have done. It clarifies how I might be of use in more direct ways. For you, maybe this is an invitation to do more, and maybe an invitation to do less. If it makes sense to help, well, what that help looks like is for you to discern.